The war room was full of noise. Alien commanders from many different worlds sat around a giant table, their faces serious and angry. Maps and battle plans floated in the air above them, glowing with blue and red lights. Everyone was talking at the same time. They shouted about strategies, weapons, and how to destroy the enemy. Each race believed their plan was the best. The room felt heavy with pride, anger, and fear. But one person stayed completely silent. The human. He sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded, his eyes sharp. He watched and listened, but he said nothing. Some of the aliens noticed him, but quickly turned back to their own loud arguments. One tall alien, with silver skin and 4 arms, laughed and said, "Humans are too emotional. Maybe he is scared." Another, a big creature covered in red armor, grunted, "Or maybe he knows he is useless in this war." The others laughed with him, but not everyone was laughing. Commander Jar, leader of the dragon-like Synth race, watched the human carefully. He remembered stories from the old wars. Stories where humans fought in ways no one expected. Stories where humans smiled before winning, and stayed silent before something worse. Commander Jar frowned. A silent human was never a good sign. The meeting continued for hours. The commanders made plans to attack the enemy forces head-on. They prepared huge weapons, powerful ships, and thousands of soldiers. The human said nothing. Finally, the Grand General, a tall being with crystal blue skin, stood up and slammed his fist on the table. "Enough," he roared. "The battle plan is ready. Tomorrow we fight." The room shook with loud cheers. Aliens pounded the table, shouted war songs, and celebrated. Only the human stayed quiet. He stood up slowly, adjusted his black jacket, and turned to leave the room without a word. Commander Jar's eyes followed him. The human walked calmly down the long hallway, passing soldiers preparing their armor and weapons. He moved like a ghost, silent, cold, and careful. Jar stood and followed him at a distance. The human didn't go to the fighters' barracks or the weapon rooms like the others. Instead, he walked to the observation deck, a wide glass room showing the stars outside. He stood there, hands behind his back, staring into space. Jar approached him carefully. "You said nothing in the meeting," Jar said. The human didn't turn around. He spoke in a low, even voice. "I said what needed to be said." Jar frowned. "You said nothing." The human finally turned his head slightly. "Exactly." There was something in his eyes. Not fear, not weakness. Something deeper. Something dangerous. Commander Jar felt a strange chill. The human turned back to the stars. "They have no idea what's coming," he said softly. Jar stepped closer. "What do you mean?" The human shook his head. "If you have to scream about your plans, you're already losing," he said. "Real battles are won in silence and in the mind." Before Jar could ask more, the human walked away into the shadows. Jar stood alone in the glass room, watching the stars. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Tomorrow, they would go to war. And if the human was silent today, it meant tomorrow would not go as planned. The ship moved quietly through space. Thousands of stars twinkled outside the large windows, but inside the ship, the air was tense. After the meeting, most of the alien commanders went back to their own groups. They were busy sharpening plans, preparing weapons, and giving speeches to their soldiers. Everyone believed the coming battle would be easy. They thought they had everything under control. But not everyone felt calm. Commander Jar kept thinking about the human silence. It stayed in his mind like a heavy stone. Later that night, Jar decided to walk through the ship. He told himself it was just a normal check, but deep inside, he knew he was searching for something. As he moved through the dark hallways, he noticed a strange thing. The human was not in his room. Most soldiers were resting or gathering in the large halls, but the human had disappeared. Curious and a little uneasy, Jar continued searching. He finally found the human standing in a small room near the ship's storage decks. The room was quiet, filled with spare parts, tools, and old communication devices. The human was looking carefully at one of the ship's emergency maps. He touched different sections of the ship on the screen, studying escape routes, shield controls, and engine systems. Jar stayed hidden behind the doorway, watching. The human didn't look worried or confused. Instead, he looked focused, almost like he was solving a difficult puzzle. After a few minutes, the human pulled out a small device from his jacket. It was not part of the ship's normal tools. It looked old, Earth-made, and full of strange wires and lights. The human connected it to the map console for only a few seconds. The device blinked once, twice, and then disappeared back into his jacket. Jar quickly stepped away before the human could see him. He leaned against the wall, heart beating faster. Why would the human need to scan the emergency systems? Why would he move so carefully, so secretly? Jar tried to calm himself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the human was just checking safety systems. But deep inside, Jar knew better. The human was preparing for something that no one else could see. The next morning, while the other commanders gave speeches and loud orders, the human stayed quiet again. He ate alone. He checked his weapons quietly. He spoke only when someone directly asked him a question, and even then he used as few words as possible. Some of the younger alien officers joked about him behind his back. "Maybe humans don't know how to fight in real wars," one said. "Maybe he'll run away when the first shot is fired," another laughed. Commander Jar said nothing. He watched. Later that day, strange things continued to happen. One of the ship's senior engineers reported that the shield system had been tested overnight. When asked who tested it, no one had an answer. A junior officer claimed he saw someone walking near the escape pods, checking the launch systems. When asked for details, he said, "I thought it was just one of the humans, but I'm not sure." Jar's mind connected the dots quickly. The human was not scared. He was preparing. But the question remained. Preparing for what? In the final briefing before the battle, the human finally spoke. Only once. When a young alien soldier asked loudly, "Are you ready, human?" The human looked up, his voice calm and flat. "I was born ready," he said. Then he smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that made your skin feel cold. It was a quiet warning, hidden behind friendly words. The others laughed and clapped him on the back. They did not understand. Commander Jar understood. He watched the human walk out of the room again, silent as a shadow. As the ships moved into battle formation, Jar whispered to himself, "When a human is silent, it means the real storm is coming." The great ship floated quietly above the battlefield. From the observation deck, it looked almost peaceful. The stars stretched like white rivers across the black sky, and the distant planets shone like small suns. Inside the ship, everything was ready. Soldiers wore their armor. Engineers checked the weapons and energy shields one last time. Commanders reviewed the final attack plans. Excitement filled the air. Many believed victory was close. They spoke with proud voices, laughed loudly, and shared old war stories. But not everyone joined the celebration. The human walked slowly through the ship's long hallways. He moved without making a sound, as if he belonged more to the shadows than to the bright lights. He passed soldiers who cheered and smiled at him, but he didn't stop. He passed officers giving speeches, but he didn't listen. He kept walking, like a man following an invisible map inside his mind. In one of the side corridors, he stopped and opened a small panel in the wall. Inside was a simple computer connection for ship maintenance. The human quickly tapped a few buttons and checked some numbers. Satisfied, he closed the panel and moved on. No one noticed. No one thought it strange that a human, a supposed guest in their alliance, knew exactly where to find hidden systems on a ship built by a dozen alien races. In the officers' mess hall, loud music played. Alien drinks were passed around, and warriors from different planets raised glasses in honor of the coming battle. Commander Jar sat alone in a corner, watching. He saw the human pass by without a glance toward the celebration. He saw the deep focus in the human's eyes. Jar remembered the stories from long ago, about humans who smiled before winning, and about humans who stayed silent before everything changed. Tonight, the human was silent. Commander Jar stood and quietly followed him at a safe distance. The human went deeper into the ship, toward the older sections where few people visited. There, he entered a small room filled with old computers and dusty communication equipment. He activated one of the ancient Earth-built devices he had carried from the start. The machine blinked with a soft green light. For a few minutes, he worked alone, sending small coded messages across space. Then he shut down the machine, placed it back into his jacket, and left without leaving any trace. Jar stayed hidden, confused, and uneasy. Why was the human sending messages just hours before the battle? And why so secretly? The next few hours passed slowly. The ship's main lights dimmed to night settings, and the corridors grew quiet. Only a few guards walked the hallways now, their steps heavy and bored. In his private room, the human sat by a small window, looking out into the stars. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. Instead, he wrote notes in a small book, an old habit from Earth, when important thoughts were too dangerous to store in machines. Sometimes he smiled to himself, a soft, knowing smile. Outside his room, the ship gently vibrated as engines adjusted the battle course. The alien commanders, in their rooms, rested peacefully. They trusted their plan. They trusted their numbers and their strength. They believed tomorrow would be their victory. Only one person knew the truth. The human's mind was not on tomorrow's battle. It was on what would happen after. Because he understood something the others didn't. The enemy was not coming to fight a normal battle. The enemy had a different plan. A plan to trap, confuse, and destroy. And unless someone acted differently, the entire ship, and everyone on it, would be lost. The human closed his notebook, stood up, and walked back to the center of the room. He looked into the dark glass of the window. His own reflection stared back at him, calm, ready, and silent. He whispered to himself, almost too softly to hear. Silence before the storm. Outside, in the cold, endless sea of stars, shadows began to move. The enemy was closer than anyone realized. And the human was ready. The first sign came softly. A low vibration passed through the ship, almost like a whisper. Most people didn't even notice. They were too busy making final checks or dreaming of glory. Only a few paused for a second, a strange feeling in the air, a lightness in their steps. But they quickly shook it off and continued their work. The human, sitting alone in the dark observation deck, felt it clearly. He closed his eyes and listened. The ship was speaking in ways only the careful could hear. The enemy was near. Commander Jar, still awake, felt it too. He stood at the window of his quarters, looking out into the empty black. There was nothing visible. No ships, no flashes of movement. But he trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him danger was already here. The Grand General gathered the commanders in the main war room. The large screen in front of them showed only a peaceful field of stars. "No enemy detected," said the head engineer proudly. "Our sensors are clear." Cheering broke out among some of the officers. Commander Jar didn't cheer. Neither did the human. The Grand General turned to the human with a small smile. "Do you finally believe we will win without much trouble?" he asked. The human looked at him quietly and said nothing. Silence fell over the room for a moment. Then the Grand General laughed and returned to his speech, full of proud promises. Across the ship, alarms stayed silent. Systems showed no signs of enemy movement. Everything looked perfect. And yet, the human stood up and left the war room without waiting for dismissal. Commander Jar noticed, but said nothing. The human moved fast, but carefully through the ship. He visited small, hidden places, maintenance rooms, control stations, shield boosters, At each point, he checked systems with his old device, made quick adjustments, and moved on. He wasn't preparing for the first strike. He was preparing for something deeper, something more dangerous. In the command center, officers argued about the best moment to launch their attack. Charts floated in the air, full of predictions and calculations. No one questioned why the human was missing. No one wondered if the enemy had their own plan. Far below the ship, hidden among the dark rocks of a broken moon, silent objects began to awaken. Tiny machines no bigger than a human hand, black as the space around them, floated up and moved toward the great ship. They carried no weapons, no loud signals. Instead, they carried confusion. Within minutes, the ship's outer sensors began to fail. Not loudly, not completely. Just small, harmless errors at first. One screen blinked and returned. Another showed a false image of an empty area. The officers ignored these small mistakes, too busy with their own excitement. Only one person understood what was happening. In a quiet corner of the ship, the human activated a secret backup system he had built from old parts. A system the enemy didn't know about. A system hidden deep in the oldest part of the ship's design. Suddenly, his private screen lit up. He saw the real enemy ships. Not ahead where the others were looking, but below, rising silently like ghosts. He moved quickly, opening a secure channel directly to Commander Jar. Jar received the message on his wrist screen. When he read the few simple words, "Look below now," his heart froze. Without a word, Jar turned the large main display to show the space below the ship. At first, the others shouted in protest. They thought he had made a mistake. But then they saw it. Shadows. Dozens of them, moving upward without sound, without light. The enemy hadn't come to fight in the open. They had come to break the ship from within. The Grand General's face turned pale. He shouted orders, but the main weapons were pointed in the wrong direction. The shields were ready for attacks from the front, not from underneath. Panic began to rise among the officers. In the middle of the confusion, the human moved calmly. He activated small countermeasures he had placed secretly during his walks across the ship. Hidden shield layers woke up. Backup sensors switched to older, untouched systems. Silent alarms warned trusted officers without alerting the enemy. The first wave of small enemy machines touched the ship's surface and were stopped by the hidden defenses the human had prepared. Inside the ship, most people still didn't understand what was happening. But the human and Commander Jar knew. The real battle had started, and it was nothing like the one the commanders had prepared for. Far away, among the stars, the enemy command ship floated silently, waiting for its plan to succeed. Inside the Great Alliance ship, two minds, human and synth, worked together to stop what everyone else had failed to see coming. The future of the fleet rested not in the loud voices of the commanders, but in the quiet steps of the one who had stayed silent from the beginning. The ship rocked gently as the first wave of enemy machines made contact. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. The lights flickered, and some panels showed small sparks, but everything remained calm. The crew still didn't understand. They believed it was just a normal malfunction, a glitch. They continued with their plans, too excited about the battle ahead to notice the quiet danger creeping inside their ship. But the human, as always, moved with purpose. He stepped onto the command deck, his face calm, his eyes sharp. Commander Jar, who had been watching the screens closely, saw him and nodded. "Did you know they were already here?" Jar asked, his voice low. The human didn't answer directly. He just looked at the screens, where the small enemy machines were now almost invisible, blending with the ship's own systems. They had become a part of the ship's own movement, a perfect blend of stealth and technology. They didn't come to fight in the open, the human finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. They came to sneak in, to break us from the inside. Jar was silent. He knew this war was different, but hearing it from the human made him realize just how different. The enemy wasn't fighting with weapons or loud explosions. They were fighting with silence, with patience, and they were already inside the ship. The human turned to the officer standing beside them. "Activate the secondary shield systems," he said calmly. The officer hesitated but nodded and moved quickly to the control panel. It was only then that the crew started to notice something wasn't right. The sensors that had once shown nothing but peaceful space now displayed strange movements. The main systems were showing strange data, but by the time the crew figured out what was happening, it was too late. The enemy machines, tiny but clever, had already disabled the primary communication lines, rendering most of the ship's controls useless. The backup systems were in place, but they had not been activated in years, and they were slow to respond. Jar looked at the human, who remained calm as always. "You knew, didn't you?" Jar asked again. "Yes," the human replied softly. "I knew the enemy wouldn't just attack us head-on. They wanted to break us slowly, quietly. They would disable our technology, spread confusion, and make us fight each other." Commander Jar's heart pounded. He understood now. The enemy's plan wasn't just to win this battle. It was to break the very spirit of the Alliance, to turn their unity into chaos. The ship's systems were failing one by one. Security systems started to glitch, and many of the crew members who were not familiar with the older systems were now lost. Panic spread as soldiers scrambled to reestablish control, but it was already too late. They had underestimated the enemy's intelligence. The human had already begun to work. He didn't need to shout orders or call for reinforcements. Instead, he walked silently through the ship, pulling out his small device. Every few minutes, he would stop at a control panel, fix a malfunction, or reprogram the ship's systems. No one had expected him to be the one to fix the problems. But the human had been watching, listening, learning from the beginning. He knew the old systems better than anyone. As the enemy's small machines continued their quiet attack, the human moved faster. He worked with a focus no one had seen before. The officers, even Commander Jar, watched in awe as he repaired, adjusted, and reset the ship's defenses. Without saying a word, he was leading them. After what seemed like hours, the human finally paused and looked up at the crew, who were now gathered in the main operations room. "You have to trust the old systems," he said, his voice steady. "Sometimes, the most advanced technology can be the easiest to fool. We need to go back to basics, use what was forgotten." The enemy didn't expect that. Commander Jar nodded, his mind racing. He had been so focused on the new systems, the flashy weapons, and the loud tactics of war. But the human had been right. The simple things, the things they thought were outdated, were their greatest strength. Jar turned to the officers. "Activate the manual systems. Use everything we have." The crew rushed to work, and the backup systems slowly started to come online. The once silent halls of the ship began to hum with life as the ancient defense mechanisms reactivated. For the first time since the attack began, the ship felt like it was truly in control again. The enemy's machines were being pushed back, one by one, as the ship's internal systems fought against them. But the human didn't relax. He kept working, fixing small issues, making sure every system was running smoothly. As the ship's control center regained power, Commander Jar stood beside him. "We couldn't have done this without you," Jar said. The human didn't reply. He simply gave a small nod, his eyes still focused on the screens. "We're not done yet," the human said softly. "They're still out there, waiting. And they'll be back." Jar nodded, knowing that this was just the beginning. The battle was far from over. But for now, the ship was secure. And they had the one thing the enemy had underestimated: time. The ship was now alive again. The hum of ancient systems filled the air. Lights flickered back to full brightness, and the sounds of the ship moving through space were more distinct. The crew, once panicked, now moved with purpose, their confidence returning as the old systems started to work their magic. Commander Jar stood at the center of the command room, watching the redouts carefully. The battle hadn't been won yet, but they had taken back control. And that, he knew, was more than half the fight. He glanced over at the human, who stood silently near the control panel. There was no boast in the human's posture, no pride in the way he moved. He was simply focused on the task ahead. "You've done it," Jar said quietly. The human looked at him, a small, unreadable expression on his face. "We're not done yet," was all the human replied, his voice calm and steady. Jar had learned to trust those words. The human was never wrong about these things. "We've regained some control," Jar said, turning his attention back to the data. "But the enemy isn't going to just leave. They're waiting for us to make the next move." The human nodded slightly, a glimmer of something in his eyes. He didn't need to ask how Jar knew this. It was obvious. They were being watched. Out there, in the cold darkness of space, the enemy had not retreated. They were biding their time, waiting for a chance to strike again. Their strategy was clear. They weren't here for a quick win. They were here to dismantle the entire ship, piece by piece, until nothing was left. The human knew this too, and that was why he hadn't stopped. He kept moving, kept working, even when others thought they had won. Because the true danger wasn't in the immediate fight. It was in the quiet, the things that couldn't be seen, that were slowly eroding the ship's power from within. Jar turned to his officers. "Prepare for an attack that we can't see. We're not going to get another warning. We need to be ready for the unknown." The crew sprang into action, their movements now synchronized and quick. The panic from earlier had turned into focus, and the quiet hum of the ship's systems was now a steady beat beneath their feet. Meanwhile, the human made his way back to the lower levels of the ship. He didn't speak to anyone as he passed, but his presence was unmistakable. He was searching for something that had gone unnoticed by the rest of the crew. Down in the deep, forgotten parts of the ship, the human paused in front of an old, rusted door. It was hidden behind layers of scrap and neglected machinery. Not many people knew it was there. He used a small tool to open the door, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor. This was one of the oldest parts of the ship, built long before the current systems had even been imagined. And it was here that the human knew the final piece of the puzzle would be found. Inside the room, the walls were lined with strange, alien technology. It was something the human had been studying in secret long before the battle had even begun. The technology wasn't theirs, but it was old, powerful, and forgotten by most. He ran his fingers over the controls, activating systems that no one else on the ship understood. Meanwhile, back in the command room, Jar was growing impatient. He needed to know what the human was doing, but the human hadn't explained himself. It wasn't like the human to act alone, but this was different. Jar could feel it. The danger was closing in. The ship's sensors began to pick up new readings, strange disturbances in the ship's power. At first, it seemed like more glitches, more minor issues. But then the readings grew stronger. The human had found something. Jar hurried to the lower levels, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallways. When he reached the hidden door, he saw the human standing in front of a glowing panel. The room was filled with a faint light, illuminating strange symbols and machinery that Jar couldn't even begin to understand. "What is this?" Jar asked, his voice filled with urgency. The human looked up, his eyes clear and focused. "It's the last part of the ship's defense," he said softly. "Something no one thought would be necessary, but it will be." Jar's heart skipped. The human was calm, but Jar could feel the weight of the moment. "This is where we turn the tables," the human continued. "It's hidden deep, away from everything else. If we use it, we can disrupt the enemy's entire plan. They've been relying on the fact that we've forgotten about this place. They didn't know we still had this." Jar watched as the human worked quickly, activating systems with a few careful movements. The strange energy in the room began to grow, as if something powerful was waking up from a long sleep. The walls of the ship seemed to hum with life, and outside, the stars began to flicker as if they were reacting to the change. "We have one chance," the human said, his voice almost a whisper. "Once we activate this, the enemy will know we found them. But they won't be able to stop it. Not in time." Jar nodded, understanding the risk. The human took a deep breath and activated the final sequence. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, slowly, the ship's energy field changed. A quiet pulse rippled through the walls, a wave of energy so subtle that it seemed almost like a dream. But in that moment, the enemy ships outside shifted, as if reacting to the pulse. The entire fleet had been caught off guard. And just like that, the human had turned the tide. Now, the true battle could begin.